How you doing, guys? Today we are working on the carburetor for my 1056. As you know, I had a pulling carburetor off of eBay on the motor. It is as described. Exactly how the seller described it, it is, and it functions fine. I just don't like how it functions in general. It runs way too rich. I know they say that's because they wanted to not starve out while under load. I guess when the volume of air being drawn through the carburetor is reduced based on the load, but it just unless it's in full send, full RPM, it's just not the right thing for this motor, and I don't like it. And you can actually see in this picture when they bored the carburetor out to just a couple thousandths under an inch, you can see they left a burr. The burr goes all the way around, and that is a pretty sharp edge. They clearly bored it from the back forward because this side, oops, let's see if I can get this thing to open up. There we go. Let me hold it with my finger. When you go to this side, there is no, it's just a straight edge there, and there's no burr. So they bored it from the backside forward, but they didn't clean this burr line. It's actually a burr, and maybe you can hear it with my nail. Let's see if I can do it. See, you can hear it. It's an actual finite burr folded out. So I'm not completely happy with that, and I think that definitely has causes an issue with the airflow through the venturi itself. The other thing they've done is they bored out or drilled out and then ultimately tapped the mounting screws for the air filter base to standard thread. Everything else is metric. Bowl nut, needles, even the seat for the bowl for the float itself. That's all metric, and it is all the standard Chinese stuff from like a standard carburetor. So, although they say they recasted this, I don't believe that the recast is like their own design. Oh, and the other thing too is they take this plug out, they must bore that area out a little bit. Well, it leaks. Fuel comes weeping out of that. So I'm not completely happy with this carburetor and the performance of that carburetor. So I decided to go to an OEM number 30 carburetor for my motor. And I have done a couple modifications to it, or I will be doing a couple modifications. Obviously, number one, I painted it black. I polished the bowl. You'll see that later. The only things I probably should have waited on the polish, on the painting. I think I jumped the gun on that. But in any event, what I did was in the air horn itself, all I did was, let's see if we can get this thing to focus a little bit for us here. There we go. All I did was I lightly Scotch-Brighted it down, and then I polished it with some mother's polish. So basically I polished from here to just about the venturi edge. And you can see the venturi edge on the stock carburetor. There's no burrs. It's nice and smooth. There is an edge. There is a sharp, corner, I should say. But it's nice. And I didn't mess with that. I just left that all original, the way it's supposed to be. This air vent, I did sand it out, made sure it was nice and smooth. I chased all the threads. I cleaned all the little areas. Sorry about this. You can't really see it, but I cleaned all the needle areas, so everything was nice and clean. Cleaned the bowl area. You can see that it's all perfect. Chased out all the passages. I did remove the K-Series choke arm because I need to install a Magnum choke arm, which I have right here. That'll be going in. So that'll be updated so I can use my push-pull cable to open and close the choke using all of the original, which we're not going to be able to see, but all the original Magnum controls that are on the blower cover. The other thing I am going to do is, let me just put that right there, is, let's see if I can twist this. The other thing I'm going to do today, and I'm going to show you how to do it, or at least how I do it, is there is some play in the throttle shaft itself. That is probably more play than I like. The reason for that also too is as the engine draws air, it does draw unfiltered air through this play in the throttle shaft itself. And also it screws up the air-fuel ratio because obviously this is air coming in behind the Venturi. So we're going to take a look at that and we're going to fix that up. I did order a new top bushing. Part number is 2515802S. And there it is. It's like $9, but it is a Kohler part. It's right there. This is a 26 carburetor that I got, and I'm just going to briefly show you exactly where it goes. This little embossment in the top of the carburetor, this one also has it on the top of the carburetor. You take this and you install it in this fashion. You kind of have to press it in. It has to be lined up, and I'll show you how I do that in a few minutes. So first off, to get this goes for the choke shaft and for the throttle shaft. You have to get the butterfly itself out, and it's held in by these little brass screws. They're fairly soft. You cannot take these out by just backing them out of the carburetor itself. You have to do a little bit of work in order to get those screws out. And the way you do that is obviously you open up the thing. If you look into the carburetor, you can see that the screws just barely protrude from the throttle shaft itself. There you go. And they are peened or rolled over so they can't come out of the shaft should they loosen up and get, because that way they don't get sucked into the motor. So in order to do that, you have to get a file. I use an old points file that I have. You get in there and you lightly file the ends of the screws back and forth until you get them down to about the throttle shaft itself. Make sure you have a good screwdriver with a good end that actually fits into the screw slots perfectly. If you got a screwdriver that's a little iffy, a little flimsy, do not use it because you will either mange the head or you will break the screw off. And these screws break off very, very easily. So once you got that screw end filed down, you then will back the screw out. I recommend that you back the screw out kind of like you're running a tap. You loosen it up. It gets a little tight, tighten it back up, loosen it out, tighten it back up, loosen it out. And as you will see, that screw will work its way out fairly nicely. Take them both out, and then we'll pull out the butterfly. So I'm going to go ahead and just get that done right now, and we'll be right back. All right, so after about, it took me about 20 minutes or so of just kind of going back and forth until I got the screws out of the throttle shaft, and probably add another 5 minutes because I dropped one of the screws on my floor here, and as you can tell, trying to find a minute little brass screw with all this crap everywhere added about another 5 minutes to the project. But I did find it, so we're good. Now, this throttle shaft is out of the number 26 carburetor that I just showed earlier. At least I think I showed earlier. No, I didn't show it earlier. Well, anyways, this is a number 26. The throat's a lot smaller. I had taken this throttle shaft out of it to take a look. This is the original throttle shaft out of my number 30 carburetor. So let's take a look at what has transpired. What I learned just by examining these two throttle shafts is the top portion of this throttle shaft, I don't think this camera will be able to show it quite as good, is really worn down. There's quite a bit of a wear lip on it right there. Let's see if I can do it. Not really, but there is a noticeable lip. This one, very, very minute. And then when we stick them in the carburetors, so let me show you what the original carburetor was like. So whoopsie daisy, that's one way to ruin the paint. You know, we got quite a bit of play. Let's back this up. Let me get my hand out of the way. Maybe it'll work. There it is. You can see we have quite a bit of play. But if we pull this out and we get the number 26 carburetor throttle shaft and we drop that in, look at that. There's like half the amount of play in that shaft. So I'm going to end up using the 26 throttle shaft, which is identical to the 30. And I'm going to install my bushing. And the bushing gets installed like so. And I'm going to show you how I do that in just a second. Okay, to install the bushing itself is not that hard at all. First off, clean the embossment area out. I got in there with a little Scotch-Brite, used some brake cleaner and a paper towel, made sure it's good and clean. And the next thing is to actually install the bushing in the housing. You can do it one or two ways. You can just take the bushing itself and just press it right into the housing itself, or you could take a 1/4-inch bolt like this one right here and create a pilot, which I am going to do. Essentially making an alignment tool so when you press that bushing in, it won't theoretically bind the throttle shaft. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut off the threads, cut off the head. That way I'm just going to be using like the shank as the alignment tool. Just before I do all of that though, I am just going to tape off the top of this carburetor. I'm going to zap it with just a touch of paint and then put the bushing in itself. I'm doing it in that fashion only because I don't want any paint on the top of the bushing. If I had a little bit of paint on the top of the bushing, that could stick up the throttle shaft itself. All right, let me get going here and we'll see it installed hopefully. Okay, before I put it in the press to put the bushing in, let me show you how this pilot that I made out of that bolt. So you can see I cut the ends off, filed them, sanded them off really nice and smooth, made sure they're clean, dropped it right in. It's all in, it's in pretty good shape. And then you take the bushing and then you just drop the bushing right over it. Now I'm going to find a socket that works real nice, fits over this real good, and obviously fits the bushing real nice. And then we're going to put it over in the old Dake press over there because we don't have to drive it home with 40,000 psi. We just a little bit, just to gently get it in place. Sometimes you can lubricate it with a little bit of Loctite, maybe some blue Loctite. You can put a little bit of touch of oil on it just to make sure that it slides in good because it is a fairly thin aluminum housing that we have here. Let's focus. Nope. But we are using material that's fairly soft, so we've got to be gentle on it. So I'm going to set it up in the press. I'm going to lube it up a little bit. I think I'm just going to use oil. It's a pretty tight fit, so Loctite's probably not needed in this situation. And I'm going to press that in. And there you go. The bushing's installed. I did do the touch-up already. I'm just waiting for the paint to dry a little bit before I move on to the next step, which is to reassemble the carburetor. I did test fit the throttle shaft and the throttle plate just to make sure that everything was lined up enough and nothing was going to bind as far as I could tell with all of my preliminary calculations. Everything should just go back together. So I got to wait till this paint dries a little bit, and which, by the way, it was duplicolor engine paint. This stuff kind of holds up pretty good with gas, so, or even those high octane fuels. So that's the reason why I did that. But as you can see, nice clean install. It's, there we go. It's, you know, pretty much flush with the top of the carburetor. Everything seems to line up real good. So once this paint dries, we will start assembling the carb. Okay, so now I'm getting ready to put the throttle shaft and the throttle plate back in place. Before I did any of this, number one, I completely cleaned the throttle shaft head to toe, made sure my little screw threads were perfectly clean. I took the carburetor, blew the whole thing out with compressed air, made sure that all the passages, everything was squeaky clean, because we want to make sure that we didn't have any of that filings from when I took the screws out to get in there, to get into anything itself. The next thing is, if we check the throttle shaft, there's almost absolutely no play in this thing whatsoever, and that's the goal. We don't want any play in the throttle shaft. So that bushing has completely rectified the issue that we had. So now what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do, is I'm going to reinstall the throttle plate. Clean the throttle plate. It's all squeaky clean. Obviously there's a witness mark where it met up with the throttle shaft, so it's pretty simple to put it back in. Here are my screws. They're all cleaned. I've also test fitted them back in the throttle shaft to make sure that we're not going to have any issues, because those, you know, we did have to file the backs of them to get the burrs off them, so that way they would come out. And to reinstall them, you got to be kind of careful. You got to make sure everything's lined up. There's ridiculously small threads. They can strip out real easy, so you have to take your time, and you have to use some kind of thread locker. You don't want just to put those in dry, because if one of those screws happen to back out and get sucked into the motor, that's it. Motor done. It's going to get jammed. Most likely it'll get jammed between the valve and the valve seat. That's pretty much what I've seen in the past. And obviously that destroys the valve, destroys the seat, most likely bends the valve. Or it gets sucked into the combustion chamber, gets tossed around. It never makes it out the exhaust valve. That's not in the program, so it typically destroys everything in the combustion chamber, the head, the piston. Sometimes it'll even be nice enough to ride up and down the side of your bore, making your block junk. So definitely want to use some Loctite. I used blue Loctite on the basis that if there's ever a chance that you need to take that throttle plate out again, the blue Loctite is about the only material that will allow you to get that screw out. If you put the red in there, I mean, you're pretty much never going to get that screw out again. You're probably going to have to snap the head off, drill it, and retap it. So, all right, so I'm going to open up this little package of thread locker. I am going to carefully put those screws back in, and the throttle part of the project is complete. Okay, throttle shaft and plate are in place. Everything is tightened down real nice. It actuates perfectly. I mean, there's no binding, there's no nothing. There's almost zero play, up and down too. So I mean, I'm real happy how that came out. One thing you'll notice is there is the little K on the throttle plate itself. That goes to the opposite side of the idle mixture screw. And that's how you get that nice fit. If you flip it around by accident, which I have done, it doesn't go to full close. So just bear that in mind when you put those throttle plates back in. Next is the choke shaft and the choke plate. I'm kind of building a hybrid here. This is a K-series carburetor, but I need the Magnum style choke arm for everything to kind of work, so I can use the original or the stock Magnum actuator arms that are on the blower cover. So I need to swap the Magnum arm into the K series carburetor. Not anything different than from the throttle plate and shaft. Basically, it's the same procedure. There's only one little difference. The Magnum spacing of the little screws that hold the plate in place is just a hair wider or further apart than a K series. And I don't think I'm going to be able to show you this with one hand, but if you lay this on top of the bolt holes, you can't, and no, it's not going to work. But essentially what happens is I need to take this baby rat tail file right here, and on both sides, I just need to, I mean, literally a 32nd of an inch, I need the file just to make these holes just a touch wider. That way I can bolt it to the shaft. No different than the throttle shaft. Make sure everything's squeaky clean, everything lines up, test fit your bolts, slide it in, Loctite everything into place, tighten it down, that's it. Now there is the little spring and detent ball that goes right here. That's what kind of, you know, locks the choke shaft in the open position. It goes, all that goes right into this hole right here. Be good if I was in camera. Goes into this hole. You'll see that, let me just turn my vise a little bit. Maybe we can get a better view of that. If you turn this around, right there. Get my point. If you notice right here, if we go in through this hole, there's another hole in the back. In there goes this tiny spring and that little detent ball. Essentially, I'm going to flip the carburetor up so the air horn is in the up position. I'll drop the spring down in there. I'll drop the ball on top of the spring, and then I'll start sliding the shaft in. Just at the time it's about to touch the ball, I will take a small punch, just push that ball in, push the shaft in just enough to catch the ball, pull the punch out, and then just continue the process of sliding the shaft through the carburetor, and it should all snap into place. It's not that hard. It's more tedious than anything else. So it's kind of hard to show on camera how it's done, but essentially that is how I will do it. All right, I'm going to get that done now. Okay, so the choke shaft and plate is in place. Everything works super smooth and real nice. So all the actuation parts look to feel as if they're going to work just fine. I did put the idle screw in. Obviously, it has to be adjusted, but it's in place. The spring is in place, so all that's good. If you notice on the idle mixture screw, there's like this little brown ring. What that is it's a small fuel grade O-ring. What that's for is you put the little O-ring in the embossment. I got an assortment of O-rings, fuel grade O-rings years and years ago at like AutoZone or maybe Western Parts America, Western Auto, whatever the hell it is. Napa might even been. Well, anyways, you stick it in there, okay, and what it does is it seals the idle screw from letting air into that particular, through the threads. Now, mind you, it's not like this is like a huge upgrade to the system, but it is sort of a nice upgrade. I've seen this done before. Seems to improve the idle a little bit, but the only special thing you need is you need a fuel grade O-ring, which that brown one is. And then when you install the idle mixture screw, which is right here, the only thing you have to do is you just lubricate the threads, not the tip, just the threads with a little bit of oil. And what that does is it just allows it to slide in and out of that O-ring easier without causing a little cut or a little mar in the O-ring, because it does fit fairly tight. You almost don't have to run it with a spring. I will still run the spring. The spring obviously will ride on top of the O-ring and kind of squash it down also. There's another O-ring for the main jet needle. The spring itself will hold that down and cause it to, and it fits just snug on the needle itself. So I'll put that on. On the main jet, I will put the idle screw in, and I will base set it to the book, which I think is like 2.5 and 2 or something like that. I'll set it there, I'll mount it on the engine, and then we'll adjust from there. Okay, so let me get those on, and then we can talk about the float. All right, so I'm putting the carburetor itself back together. I did get some new parts. The rebuild kit is this one right here. Obviously, it's a genuine Kohler 2575701S is the part number. And I did get a new float, which was supposed to be Kohler NOS, but it came in a Ziploc bag. It did say factory packing. That is not Kohler factory packing. But the part number is 2575703. Essentially, the float looks, I guess, fairly okay. It is brand new, but in any event, the seat, the float seat and needle are in. Essentially, I just screwed it in. A long time ago, I got this socket from AutoZone. I ground it down so it would fit nice in there. It's pretty tight. You can't really fit a standard socket in there, and if you try to get, if it's crusted in there and you try to use a open-end box wrench, it tends to just become a huge nightmare. So I made that socket. It's 1/4 inch, just on a hand drive. Just put it in there, snug it down, good. Not super tight, but good. Then you're going to add the float. Just turn it over. Basically, the book says it's supposed to be 11/64 from the lower edge of the float to the base of the carburetor. Essentially, as long as it's running parallel with the base of the carburetor, you're going to be fine. I will probably measure mine just to make sure, but essentially, if it runs parallel with the base of the carburetor, you're going to be A-okay. I've already adjusted the needles to 2.5 and 2.5. That was per my Magnum book. I did it as the Magnum 14 base settings. So that's what I did. So both the needles are set. I'm going to put the float in, set that, put the put the bowl on, and using, obviously using the new bowl bolt gasket. I only need one of the deflectors. So O-ring goes in the slot here to seal the bowl, and then you drop that little guy over the seal, and what this does is it keeps fuel from sloshing up into the breather, the bowl breather. So that's what that is. It's kind of like a control. You only need one. I got one with the kit, and I got one with the new float. So I'm going to get this thing measured up, put together, and I will show you the completed carburetor. And there it is, guys, the completed carburetor. Looks pretty nice, looks good. I'm hoping it performs as good as it did. It will. I polished the bowl. That's an NOS bowl that I had. It really only took me maybe an hour to get it that nice, which it looks real nice. I'm real happy with it. And I just hit the screws before I put it all together with a little bit of polish just to make it look a little better. I also did the bowl nut has been lightly polished. If you notice, this is the replacement float. I didn't like it. I don't know why. Just something was telling me not to use it. I went with my gut. Usually your gut's right. So I didn't use it. I ended up getting an old float that I knew was good. I dropped it right into the carburetor. You know, basically it measured out perfectly. So I didn't have to really bend the tabs or anything to that effect. And there it is. All rebushioned, all sealed up, all cleaned. We had it all polished up and ready to go. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you for sticking with me through this little project. This was a long video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up so that way it'll get shown a little bit more. Individuals that don't know about my channel will actually get a chance to see this. As always, thank you very much for all your support. I very much appreciate it all. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. I do have some other projects coming up in the near future. If you like small engines and tractors and things like that, you may be interested in them. So you'll get a notification. And hit that bell. You got to hit the bell. You can't just subscribe anymore. YouTube wants you to do more. So hit the little bell next to the subscribe so you get notified when my next video is posted up. Thanks a lot, guys. I hope you're having a good day, and thank you for your support as always. Later.